Join me in prayer this morning. God, in these moments, open our hearts, open our minds, open our spirits, that we might hear your word for our lives. We ask this in his name. Amen. I suspect that of all the words you might have expected to hear this morning when you came to church, transfiguration was not at the top of the list. Transfiguration is a strange word, one that we never use in everyday speech or conversation. The word transfiguration literally means a dramatic change in appearance or something that causes a dramatic transformation in the way we see things, perceive things, or understand things. A transfiguration experience is one in which great insight seems to break in on us. That's what author Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, learned one morning on a commuter train. Covey says that people were on that morning train, some sitting quietly, some reading, some dozing, and others contemplating with their eyes closed. It was, he said, a calm and peaceful scene until the train stopped at a station where a man and 3 of his children boarded. The 3 children were soon running back and forth, yelling at each other, throwing things at one another, even grabbing at newspapers. Covey says that it was all quite disturbing, and particularly so, Covey says, because the father, who was sitting right next to him, did nothing. Covey said he was feeling pretty annoyed and agitated with the whole situation and could not believe the father could be so insensitive to the other passengers as to let his children run wild and simply sit there and do nothing. And clearly, the other passengers on the train were also agitated and annoyed. Finally, Covey says he could restrain himself no longer, and so for himself and the other annoyed passengers, Covey finally spoke up and said to the man, "Sir, with all due respect, your children are running wild and disturbing an awful lot of people. I wonder if you wouldn't mind being a parent and controlling them just a bit." The man turned to Covey and lifted his eyes to him as if coming into consciousness for the first time, and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I should do something about it. You see, we just left the hospital where their mom died about an hour ago, and I guess I'm still in a bit of a shock and don't know what to think or what to do, and I guess my children don't know either." You can imagine how he felt in that moment. Covey says that suddenly his perspective had changed dramatically. Now keep in mind, nothing had changed on their train. The people were the same. The annoyances were the same. Those 3 kids were still being quite annoying, but what had changed was the way Covey saw things. His perspective had been altered by the experience, and he was forced to see things from a different perspective. And Covey said that because my perspective had changed, I felt differently. And so I behaved differently, and my annoyance and agitation had vanished. And I was overcome with compassion and sympathy. And so I said, "Oh my God, your wife just died. I am so very sorry. Can you tell me about it? Can I help in some way?" Covey had on that train that morning a transfiguration moment. That is to say, a dramatic transformation in his perspective. In our text from Mark's Gospel this morning, Mark tells us that Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up to a high mountain where Jesus was transfigured. That is to say, there was a dramatic transformation in Jesus' appearance. He began to shine with bright rays of light. His face lit up like the sun, and his robe gleamed a bright white, whiter than anyone could bleach it. And as Peter, James, and John witnessed this amazing sight, they were stunned when out of nowhere Moses and Elijah appeared, speaking to Jesus. And the entire scene was enveloped in a bright cloud. And then Peter, James, and John heard a voice from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Now, I don't know if the phrase mountaintop experience was coined because of the story of the Transfiguration, or if it simply describes what kind of experience Jesus and his disciples had that day on that mountaintop. But I do know that a mountaintop experience changes the way we see things, the way we perceive things, and the way we understand things. And that a mountaintop experience can be life-changing. And that one cannot have a mountaintop experience and remain the same. I think you would agree with me this morning that our world needs the change of perspective that a mountaintop experience can bring. A world that believes being greedy is more important than helping the needy could use a mountaintop experience. A world that believes war is more profitable than peace could use a mountaintop experience. A world that is convinced it's okay to hate others, oppress others, discriminate against others, and terrorize others in the name of the eternal God of the universe could use a transforming mountaintop experience. An experience that changes our perspective and helps us to see things not as they are, but as they ought to be. Peter was so astounded by what was happening on that mountaintop that he said to Jesus, "Man, am I glad we're here. Here's what I think we ought to do. Let's put up tents, 3 of them. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, and we'll just stay here worshiping and relishing this moment forever." But no matter how glorious of a mountaintop experience one lives through, no one can stay on the mountaintop forever. We have to come back down to earth, just as Moses did when he came down from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, and just as Jesus did after his glorious transfiguration. We have to come back down to earth and face the world we live in. I'm reminded of an old song from the 1960s, Eve of Destruction, that said in part, "Think of all the hate there is in Red China, then turn around and look in Selma, Alabama. We may leave here for 4 days in space, but when we return, it's the same old place." Some of you know that the story of Apollo 8 is one of my favorite stories. Apollo 8 was the first spacecraft to take humans beyond the grip of Earth's gravity. It was December of 1968. Astronauts Frank Borman, James Lovell, and Bill Anders flew to the moon and entered orbit around the moon's cratered surface. And although they did not land on the lunar surface, Apollo 8's flight was a necessary prelude to doing so. 69 hours and 15 minutes after throwing off its launch pad shackles and slipping the surly bonds of Earth, Apollo 8 was in orbit above the moon. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the tumultuous year included political assassinations, a war in Vietnam, and riots in the streets. And while the crew of Apollo 8 hovered above the moon, what us mere mortals on Earth wanted to know was, what did the moon look like? A question we sang about in my 3rd grade elementary school class that went, "Zoom a little zoom and a rocket ship. Off we go on a trip, heading for the moon in a rocket ship. We're gonna zoom, zoom, rocket. Zoom, let's see if the moon is made out of green cheese." Ha ha ha. Astronaut Ed Lovell provided an answer to that question, saying from space that the moon is essentially gray, no color, like plaster of Paris, and it's pitted with massive craters. Astronaut Frank Borman said the moon looks like a lonely and forbidding place, an expanse of nothing. And astronaut Bill Andrews said, "You can see that the moon has been bombarded through the eons with meteorites. Every square inch of the moon is pockmarked and looks like a sand pile my kids have been playing in for a long time." Each astronaut spoke of the vast loneliness of the moon as awe-inspiring, and how it makes you realize just what you have back there on Earth. That Christmas Eve, while millions of Earthlings gathered in their homes, and a beautiful blue and white Earth rose on the screen in a shot from Apollo 8, astronaut Bill Andrews spoke to the planet saying, "For all the people on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message we would like to send to you." There was a brief pause, and the astronauts stunned, listening Earthlings when they read these words from the book of Genesis. "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God saw that it was good." And in that one brief shining moment, we Earthlings were able to imagine a new earth, a better world, a world without sickness, sadness, pain, hate, and war, all from the perspective of outer space. And it transformed the way we thought of space, the moon, and ourselves. Jesus came down from his mountaintop experience to face people who were struggling with their lives and with their faith. I know we all want our mountaintop experiences to lift us up and lift us out of the uncertainty, the pain, the questions, the doubts, the fears, and the needs we all have. But no, a mountaintop experience does not shield us from the challenges of life. But what it can do is to change the way we see things so that we can change the way things are. Jesus came down from his mountaintop experience with a glow that embraced and included people, all people. And he made them feel loved and accepted and included. And so that is our charge also. To be so transformed by our faith and our faith experiences that we too embrace and love with the same unconditional love we have received from the God who came down in the person of Jesus Christ. This week, we begin again the journey with Jesus to Jerusalem, to Calvary, and to an old rugged cross. And we take this journey so that we might learn to see each other and see our world in a whole new way. Because God in Jesus came down so that we might know that God is with us, wherever we are on our life's journey. And that God calls us to share the divine love with everyone, everywhere. And Norfield, I just believe that God is calling us to imagine a new earth and to see our world in new ways so that we can make it a better place. Because here is what we see when we see the world through the eyes of Jesus. We see the very glory of God in the one who came down and died on the cross for us. And his coming, and his dying, and his rising from the dead gives us the opportunity to imagine a whole new way of life. It's in our hands.